morning. I'm Rick O'Donnell, founder and CEO of Skills Fund. And a question for you, how many people believe that the federal student loan system works? I certainly don't, and I think the last 2.5 days of this conference, most people like to talk about better student outcomes. We want more students to graduate from college, more students to go to college, more students to leave college prepared for the world of work, and students to have less debt for paying for college. The question is, what are the biggest impediments to achieving better student outcomes? I would say it's the Higher Education Act, which today the federal government spends nearly $100 billion annually on federal student loans. Congress is currently trying to reauthorize this for the 9th time. And the question is, what has it accomplished the previous 8 times? Well, a lot more students go to college today than they did 40 years ago, but are they actually better off? In many cases, we have students who are graduating without the skills they need for the modern economy. We have students who enroll in college and drop out and never complete. And we have students with massive student loan debt. The current default rate in the federal student loan program is in the double digits and has been that way for almost a decade, at levels that in the mortgage crisis a decade ago caused the economy to melt down. And even more, a fundamental belief that going to college, even some college, is better than no college at all, is really being called into question because students go to college, drop out, don't have skills, and then have debt they can't repay. They're actually better off than if they had never gone to college. And so as Congress rewrites the Higher Ed Act for the 9th time, do we think they're actually going to do anything to fix that? I don't. I think it's a little bit like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. And we know what happened with that. We have massive labor shortages in this country, we have skill gaps in this country, and there's very little coming out of the proposals for Congress to fix the fundamental problems in the federal student loan program. And what is the problem? Well, it's really about following the money, and what are the incentives of all the players? If you're an accrediting agency and you accredit a university, you are allowing those students to access Title IV federal funds. But what if you get that wrong? What if you're an accreditor who says that's a good university? And I'm talking about public universities. I used to oversee the higher ed system in the state of Colorado, and I can tell you there are public universities with abysmal graduation rates, with high cohort default rates on student loan debt. If the accreditor says that's a good university, students go, can't graduate, can't get jobs, what bad happens to the accreditor? Absolutely nothing. In fact, the accreditors are paid for by the schools they accredit, so they don't have an incentive to ever de-accredit or non-accredit the people who pay their bills. What happens to the lender if there's a bad student outcome? Nothing. Student loans aren't dischargeable in bankruptcy, so lenders can go after someone until they die to try and recover that debt. The federal government, private lenders. And what happens to the school? If a university enrolls a student, collects their tuition dollars, and the student drops out, or graduates and can't get a job, anything bad happen to the university? No, it doesn't. It's collected that tuition dollars and has moved on to enrolling the next cohort of students. In the current system, the only person who really pays for a poor outcome is the student, who has no job, few prospects, they've wasted, most importantly, time, and they have a lot of student debt. So Skills Fund is changing this model. We are building a new platform that will ultimately, we believe, can be better than the federal student loan program. And it starts by putting the student at the center and realigning all the monetary incentives around what's best for the student. So Skills Fund starts by actually being an accreditor. We go in and look at schools and evaluate their quality. What are their outcomes? What are their admission standards? Do they actually have a return on education for the student? And for us, return on education is actually a mathematical formula. How long is the program and what does it cost, divided by the likelihood you'll graduate on time, get a job in what they trained you for, and what the job pays. And we start there. And the second thing we've done is we launched what's called, you can see it says there, SIR, the Council on Integrity and Results Reporting, which is how do you know when a school says 80% of our students get jobs, what that means? Are those full-time jobs, part-time jobs? Are they jobs in what the student went to school for, or jobs at a retail store? And so we have a group of schools who are now publishing their outcomes in an apples-to-apples comparison. And it says if 100 students enroll, how many graduated on time? What jobs did they get, in what field, and at what pay? And those outcomes are audited by their auditors, that students can actually see the results. But we're also the lender. So as an accreditor, if I say that's a good school, and I put my seal of approval on it, I turn around and then finance students to go to that school. And if I'm wrong, and it turns out that's a really crappy school, I'm going to lose money. because I'm the lender and students will default in their loans. And so suddenly our incentives are all aligned about making sure that quality of that school is good. We're not paid by the schools to do that. And so what we're doing is changing the model. By combining the accreditor and the lender, you now have an entity that's focused on one thing, which is ultimately, right, we want students to pay back their loans. And the best way to ensure students are paying back their loans is not to finance them to go to subpar programs that have poor outcomes. But the other thing we do is require schools to share in the risk. For every loan we disperse for a student to a school, the school has to set aside a portion of that loan into an escrow account that's used to cover default losses. So schools can't enroll a bunch of students and not care what happens to them, because if students default in their loans, the school has skin in the game and to play for this. And it's working. I stood at GSV 4 years ago and talked about this as an idea. Today we partner with over 70 schools. We've done nearly $100 million in loans, financed nearly 10,000 students. We have year-over-year growth. We actually had EBITDA on our second year. And it's grown. We started with software coding boot camps and work with over 95% of the software coding and data science boot camp industry. We're now expanding to other skill schools, from commercial driving schools to diesel technology schools to nursing schools to accounting schools. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what's the return on education for the student. And that's where we're headed. But ultimately, we're building a platform that's better than federal student loans. We are now on track to be able to offer interest rates that are lower than Title IV interest rates. And the reason is because we know that the outcomes of the programs students are going to are high, and therefore the risk of financing students is really low. And we now have students coming to Skills Fund saying, hey, I want to go to coding school. I want to go to commercial driving school. What are the good schools? And we're able to tell the students the answer to that because we've actually underwritten the quality of the school in a way that accreditors should, but accreditors don't. So we're just getting started, we're growing, and eventually we'll show that there's a much better model for better student outcomes than the federal student loan system. Thank you.